The Lion Man of Hohlenstein-Stadel. The Lion Man is the oldest statue on Earth, and it is a statue of something that has never existed. Otto Wölzing pulled it out of the Stadel cave in the Rhone Valley of southern Germany on the 25th of August, 1939. It was the last day of the dig. Germany invaded Poland 6 days later, the excavation was abandoned, and the fragments went into a box that sat in a museum store for 30 years. When they were finally reassembled, the shape that emerged was a standing figure, about 31 centimeters tall, carved from a single piece of mammoth ivory with the head and forelimbs of a cave lion and the body and legs of a human being. It is roughly 40,000 years old. Experimental archaeologists have recreated it using only flint tools. It takes around 400 hours. That is somebody in an ice age with limited daylight and a hard calorie budget, spending months of labor on an object that cannot be eaten, worn, or thrown. And the subject is not a person and not an animal. The first figurative sculpture we have any record of is a thing from somebody's imagination. Art did not begin with the world. It began with something outside it. The Shigir Idol. The Shigir Idol is twice as old as the pyramids, and it survived by accident. Gold miners found it in January 1890, 4 meters down in a peat bog at Kirovgrad, in the Ural Mountains east of Yekaterinburg. Peat is anaerobic. Wood does not rot in it. What came out was a monumental sculpture in larch carved with stone tools, covered in geometric patterns, with at least 8 faces set along its length. For a century, nobody would accept how old it was. The style looked Iron Age. Then, in 2018, a German and Russian team ran accelerator mass spectrometry on the core of the wood and got roughly 12,500 years. That is the end of the last ice age. It predates Göbekli Tepe. It predates agriculture. It predates pottery. Part of it is already gone. A section was lost in the Soviet period and is known only from a drawing made in 1914 which shows the original standing over 5 meters. The markings are not decoration. They repeat, they vary, and they run in sequences. Nobody can read them, and there is nothing else from that world to compare them to. Göbekli Tepe, Pillar 43. Pillar 43 is the strangest carving from the strangest site in archaeology, and the whole thing was deliberately covered up. Göbekli Tepe sits on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey. A survey team walked over it in 1963 and wrote it off as a medieval cemetery. Klaus Schmidt came back in 1995, looked at the broken limestone, and understood what he was standing on. The enclosures are around 11,500 years old. The T-shaped pillars reach 5.5 meters and 10 tons, and they were quarried, dressed, moved, and raised by people who had no pottery, no metal, no wheel, and no farming. Pillar 43 is the one people photograph, a vulture with its wings spread, a disc balanced above one wing, scorpions, snakes, and a small headless human figure below. Here is the part that gets skipped. The enclosures did not collapse and were not abandoned to the weather. They were backfilled. Somebody carried the rubble in and buried the whole thing on purpose. We have no idea why you would build that and then hide it. The Ain Ghazal statues. In 1983, a road crew cutting a highway through the northern edge of Amman, Jordan, opened a pit full of faces. The statues inside are around 9,000 years old, which makes them among the oldest large representations of human beings ever made. They are not stone and not clay. They are lime plaster, molded over a frame of bundled reeds and cord up to 1 meter tall, with eyes ringed in bitumen that still hold a stare across 90 centuries. A second cache turned up in 1985. Between them, more than 30 figures. Several of them have 2 heads on one body. They were not smashed, and they were not thrown away. Each cache was laid carefully in a pit dug beneath the floor of a building that had already been abandoned and covered over. The bodies are barely modelled. All the effort went into the faces, gods, ancestors, specific dead individuals, or something we have no word for. Every one of those has been argued in print, and none of them can be tested. The people who made them left no writing, and the practice stops. Nothing downstream inherits it. The Tărtăria tablets. The Tărtăria tablets might be the oldest writing in the world, or they might be nothing, and the man who found them destroyed the evidence that would have settled it. Nicolae Vlasă was digging a Neolithic pit at Tărtăria in Transylvania in 1961. He recovered 3 small clay tablets covered in incised signs, 2 of them pierced with holes as though they were meant to hang. In the same pit lay 26 clay and stone figurines, a shell bracelet, and the burnt, broken bones of an adult human being. Radiocarbon on bone from the layer came back around 5,300 years before Christ. If the tablets belong to that layer, they carry symbols 1,000 years older than anything in Mesopotamia. The problem is what happened next. The tablets came out damp and fragile, and Vlasă baked them to harden them. That removed any chance of dating the objects themselves, and his stratigraphic notes are thin enough that critics argue the tablets are intrusive, later material that fell into an older pit. And the deeper question is worse, whether the Vinchar signs are writing at all, or an accounting system, or ownership marks, has never been resolved. The Ubaid lizard figurines. From the mud of southern Iraq, 6,000 years ago, comes a set of small clay people with the heads of reptiles. They were excavated at Ur and Eridu from the Ubaid period, roughly 5,500 to 4,000 years before Christ, the culture that lays the foundation for Sumer. The figurines are slender, standing or seated, some male and some female. The heads are elongated, snouted, with slitted eyes formed from applied pellets of clay. Several of the females are nursing an infant, holding it against the shoulder, the reptilian head bent toward it. The internet has decided what these are. Ignore that. The serious answer is almost certainly stylization, the same convention that turns a Cycladic face into a blade, or an Egyptian god into an animal head on a human body. Nobody working on Ubaid material thinks these are portraits, but that is a category, not an explanation. Ubaid people had no writing. There is no myth, no name, no ritual text, and no later tradition that carries the image forward. We can say what they are, probably not. What they meant to the person who buried one in a grave is simply gone. The Indus Valley Seals. The Indus civilization covered more ground than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, held over 1 million people, ran plumbing and standardized weights, and we cannot read a single word of it. What survives is thousands of small squared seals of carved steatite, mostly from Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, between 4 and 5,000 years old. Each carries an animal, most often a one-horned bovine that scholars call the unicorn, and a line of signs above it. Around 400 distinct signs have been catalogued. The line is the problem. The average inscription is about 5 signs long. The longest known is under 30. There is no bilingual text, no Rosetta equivalent, no long document of any kind, and no certainty about what language the people spoke. In 2004, a paper by Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel argued the obvious explanation for the shortness. The signs are not writing. They proposed a non-linguistic system, closer to heraldry or tax marks. That argument is still live. 2 decades on, the field cannot agree on whether the thing it is trying to decipher is a script. The Phaistos Disc. On the 3rd of July, 1908, An Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernier found a fired clay disc in a basement room of the palace at Phaistos, on Crete. It is about 16 centimeters across. Both faces carry a spiral of signs running inward. 241 tokens in total, drawn from 45 distinct symbols, heads with feather crowns, ships, shields, a walking figure, a beehive. The signs were not scratched. They were stamped, each one impressed with a prepared punch. Somebody cut 45 separate dies and used them repeatedly on wet clay 3,000 years before Gutenberg. And then, nobody in the Mediterranean does anything remotely like it again for 3 millennia. It is around 3,700 years old. It is undeciphered, and the reason is brutal and simple. It is a single object. 45 signs across 241 tokens is not enough text to break, and no second inscription using the same signs has ever been found anywhere. A minority of scholars think it is a forgery. Settling that would take thermoluminescence testing, which requires drilling. The museum has declined. The Nebra sky disk. The oldest known image of the night sky was dug up illegally by 2 men with a metal detector, and its date has been fought over ever since. They took it off a hilltop near Nebra in Saxony-Anhalt in 1999 along with swords, axes and bracelets, then sold it on. It surfaced in a police sting in a Basel hotel in 2002, a bronze disc, 32 centimeters across, inlaid in gold. A sun or full moon, a crescent, 32 scattered stars and 1 tight cluster red as the Pleiades. 2 arcs were added later along the rim, spanning exactly the angle between midsummer and midwinter sunrise at that latitude. The gold and the tin came from Cornwall, a hilltop in central Germany, connected by trade to the far end of Britain some 3,500 years ago. Then, in 2020, 2 Munich researchers argued the whole thing was 1,000 years younger because the find spot came from looters and could not be trusted. A rebuttal followed within months, and the Bronze Age date is now back in the mainstream. But the crime at the start of the story means the argument can never be fully closed. The Cascajal block, the oldest writing in the Americas, is a slab of serpentine that road builders pulled out of a gravel quarry, and there has never been a second one. It came from Lomas de Tacamichapa in Veracruz, Mexico, in the 1990s, kept locally, and published in the journal Science in 2006. 36 centimeters long, 12 kilograms, with a shallow rectangular face carrying 62 incised glyphs drawn from 28 distinct signs. The signs behave like writing. They run in horizontal rows, several appear more than once, and short groups repeat in the same order elsewhere on the block. Sequences, which is what language does and decoration does not. Associated ceramics put it around 900 years before Christ in the Olmec heartland, 3 centuries before the earliest Zapotec or Maya texts. 2 things stop it dead. The quarry workers removed it from its layer, so the date rests on pottery found nearby rather than on the block itself. And in the 20 years since publication, no second example of this script has been found. Not a fragment, not a single shared glyph. An entire writing system known from one object. The Antikythera Mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers sheltering from a storm off the island of Antikythera surfaced from a Roman-era wreck with bronze statues and a corroded lump of metal that nobody paid attention to. Months later, in a museum in Athens, the lump split along a crack and a gear wheel was visible inside it. What the last century of research has recovered from 82 fragments is a geared analog computer built somewhere in the Greek world around 150 to 100 years before Christ. At least 30 bronze gears, the smallest with teeth barely a millimeter apart. cut by hand. It tracked the moon's phase and its variable speed across the sky using a pin and slot mechanism. It ran the 19-year Metonic cycle and the 18-year Saros cycle to predict eclipses, and it named the month and the likely hour. One dial counted down the 4-year cycle of the athletic games, including the Olympics. The mystery is not what it does. That is largely solved. The mystery is that the engineering is far too mature to be a first attempt. No precursor has ever been found. No ancient author explains how such a thing was made, and nothing of comparable complexity survives anywhere on Earth for the next 1400 years. The Copper Scroll. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is one document that is not scripture, not prophecy, and not written on skin. It was found in 1952 in Cave 3 at Qumran. 2 rolls of hammered copper, oxidized solid, impossible to unroll. In 1955, a professor of mechanical engineering in Manchester sawed it into 23 curved strips with a fine circular blade, which is still the only reason anyone can read it. It is a list. 64 entries, each giving a location and an amount of buried gold and silver. Under the steps at the salt pit, in the cistern beneath the wall, in the tomb in the ravine of Akor. The quantities added up run to tons of precious metal, more than the region could plausibly have held. The Hebrew is wrong for its period, closer to the later Mishnaic dialect than to anything else at Qumran. And 7 Greek letters are scattered through it for no understood reason. Not one of the 64 locations has ever been securely identified. Whether it records the Jerusalem temple treasure hidden ahead of the Roman siege, or is a piece of folklore written down, is unresolved after 70 years. The Baghdad Battery. This is the famous one, and the honest version is more interesting than the myth. In 1936, a ceramic jar about 13 centimeters tall turned up at Kujut Rabu, near Baghdad. Inside was a rolled copper cylinder with an iron rod suspended down its center, sealed at the top with asphalt. Wilhelm König, then running the Baghdad Antiquities Administration, published a note in 1938 suggesting it was a galvanic cell used for electroplating gold. Replicas do work. Fill one with vinegar or grape juice and you get around half a volt. Here is what has to be true for that to be the answer. And none of it is. There are no wires from the period, no conductors, no electroplated object has ever been recovered from the region and the era. No text mentions it. A single cell producing half a volt is useless without a series, and nobody has found 2 of these together. What has been found is the answer. Near identical vessels from Seleucia held rolled papyrus, with copper sleeves protecting the scrolls from the damp. The objects themselves vanished from the Iraq Museum during the looting of 2003. The unexplained part is why the wrong answer traveled further than the right one. The Roman Dodecahedra. Around 120 of these have been found. Every one is a small hollow bronze shell with 12 pentagonal faces, a circular hole cut through each face, and a knob at each of the 20 corners. They are between 4 and 11 centimeters across, and the holes are all different sizes. They come from the 2nd to 4th centuries after Christ, and from a very specific place: Gaul, Britain, the Rhineland, Switzerland, Hungary, the northwestern provinces, and essentially nowhere else. Not Italy, not Greece, not Egypt or North Africa. Rome is the best documented ancient society there is. We have its shopping lists, its tax records, its graffiti, its mosaics of everyday objects, and letters complaining about socks. In all of it, the number of times a dodecahedron is mentioned, described, drawn, or depicted is 0. Surveying instrument, candlestick, knitting frame, gaming die, sewing calendar, religious object, cult item of a suppressed Gallo-Roman priesthood. All argued, none demonstrated. Several were found in hoards alongside coins, which means whoever buried them thought they were worth hiding. A complete example came out of a field in Lincolnshire in 2023. It did not help. The Lycurgus Cup, a Roman drinking cup in the British Museum, is jade green when light falls on it and blood red when light passes through it. It is a cage cup from the 4th century after Christ, cut from a solid block of glass, so that the outer figures stand free of the vessel behind them, joined by tiny bridges. The scene shows King Lycurgus being strangled by vines. That carving alone represents an extraordinary amount of skilled labor. The color is something else. In 1990, analysis at the British Museum found the cause: particles of a silver and gold alloy dispersed through the glass, roughly 50 to 100 nanometers across. The particles absorb and scatter light depending on which direction it comes from. It is a nanomaterial made in the 4th century. The concentration is minute, a matter of parts per million, and it is spread evenly through the whole vessel. The unresolved question is whether the Roman glassmaker knew. Getting that dispersion by accident is not impossible. Metal contamination in glass batches was ordinary. Getting it evenly at that concentration is not. And only a handful of dichroic Roman glass fragments exist anywhere in the world, which means either the recipe was a secret or it was luck. The stone spheres of Costa Rica. In the 1930s, United Fruit Company crews clearing rainforest for banana plantations in the Diquís Delta of southern Costa Rica began hitting stone balls. More than 300 are known. They are mostly gabbro, a hard igneous rock, and they range from a few centimeters to 2.5 meters across and around 15 tons. The large ones are close to true spheres, accurate to within a couple of centimeters, shaped by pecking and grinding with harder stone. The nearest source rock is kilometers from where many of them ended up. They were made by the Diquís culture between roughly 300 and 1500 years after Christ. They were found in deliberate arrangements, lines, triangles, groupings outside chiefly compounds. Almost none of that survives. Plantation workers rolled them away as ornaments, and a rumor of gold inside led treasure hunters to dynamite dozens of them. Of the 300 plus known, roughly 6 are still standing where they were placed. The alignments were the evidence. They were destroyed before anyone recorded them, and the culture that made the spheres collapsed before Europeans arrived, leaving nobody to ask. The Voynich Manuscript. This is the youngest object here, and the only one that has defeated professional code breakers. Wilfrid Voynich bought it in 1912 from a Jesuit college outside Rome. 240 vellum pages illustrated in color. Plants that match no known species, circular astronomical diagrams, and naked women standing in green pools connected by systems of tubes. Every page is covered in a flowing script of around 25 recurring characters that corresponds to no known alphabet. Radiocarbon dating at the University of Arizona in 2009 put the vellum at 1404 to 1438. The inks are consistent with that period. A modern hoax, it is not. The text behaves like language. The word lengths follow the statistical distribution that natural languages follow. Certain words cluster in sections about certain subjects, and the character sequences have internal structure. Producing all of that deliberately in the 15th century would itself be a remarkable achievement. William Friedman, the man who broke Japan's purple cipher, worked on it for decades and failed. So did teams at Bletchley Park and later at the National Security Agency. A decipherment is announced every few years and collapses within months. Nobody has read a sentence of it. Rongorongo. On Easter Island, a script was invented, used and lost inside a single lifetime. About 26 wooden objects survive: tablets, a staff, 2 figures, a birdman ornament scattered through museums, and not one of them is on the island. The glyphs are carved in reverse boustrophodon. You read a line left to right, then rotate the tablet 180 degrees to read the next. There are around 120 basic signs and several hundred compounds, birds and fish and standing figures. A French missionary named Eugène Ayrault reported them in 1864. He was 2 years too late. Peruvian slave raids in 1862 and 63 had taken a large part of the population, and the survivors who were returned brought smallpox back with them. By 1877, the number of Rapa Nui people alive on the island was 110. Everyone who could read the tablets was in that gap. In 2024, radiocarbon on a tablet held in Rome dated the wood to before European contact, which, if the carving is contemporary with the wood, would make this an independent invention of writing. Nobody can read it to find out.